So, you've come to the end of the Introduction to Special Needs course. Well done for making it this far. And it's my job now to sum up some of the learning that should have taken place and some of the key points that we learned about over the duration of the course. So, pardon me. The first thing that I want to start off by saying is that all children, in fact, all people, are different. And every child is a special child. Some children are just more different and more special and have more needs than others. And special needs is not something that will stay static and still for the child's entire life. Some children at different points of their life, of their career, of their learning journey may have some additional needs, some additional learning needs, some special needs, and then they may not. Other things may be with them for life, however, depending on the exact nature of the special need. And the same can be said for disabilities. Even us as adults, many of us will become disabled at some time in our life, either temporarily or as we grow older or we develop new conditions chronically rather than temporarily. So that's just the first thing that I wanted to start with, to remind you that actually all children are different and all children have needs, and those needs are very individual to each child. And if we start with that as a premise when we're thinking about special needs, then we can start to consider, well, some needs, yes, are more special or more specific than others. Thinking about the definition of special needs, this is where a child or young person might require additional support or specialist support or have some limitations. We learnt about inclusion, and we learnt about inclusion being a principle of including everybody. And that's easier said than done, because inclusion is about identifying barriers, whether they're attitudinal barriers, social barriers, physical barriers, and breaking down those barriers to give access, to give inclusive access. So barriers to play, barriers to learning, first of all, identifying what they are, then thinking about how can we break those down, how can we give access to all children. And that essentially is what inclusion is. It's about including everybody. We looked at in the course this idea of inclusive provision that includes disabled children and non-disabled children, children who have special needs and children who do not. And everyone's included in one provision. But we also explored the idea of separate provision and why separate or more specialist provision can also be beneficial for children. We looked at what special needs means in an early years context, and in doing that we looked at the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and we learned that children, disabled children, have the right to a full, decent life. And the UN conventions state that we need to ensure that children have dignity, self-reliance, and active participation. And for me, that's really important. How can all children, with their special needs, with the disabilities that they might have, with their limitations, with their with everything considered, how can they take a full and active role and participate actively in what we're doing. We looked at different categories of special needs, that they were divided into 4 very broad categories: communication and interaction, cognition and learning, social, emotional and health, and sensory, physical special needs. We looked in more detail at a range of the of more specific disorders, and one of the ones that we looked at was autism. And for me, one of the things that I think as early years practitioners, especially if we're getting children quite young, for me, one of the things that I've had to deal with most in my career when I've been supporting special needs and doing early assessment and diagnostics, etc., has been around identifying children who are autistic, and remembering that the autistic spectrum disorder is it's a spectrum, it's a scale. So you might have a child who is on the autistic spectrum disorder spectrum who is high functioning and can manage day to day, and children right down the other end who struggle a lot more with daily tasks and daily routines. And certainly for children on the higher functioning end of the scale, if the children are coming to your setting as babies, then it might be in the nursery, in the early years setting, where the first signs and indicators might become apparent that a child could be on the spectrum. So I just jotted down some of the things that we discussed on the course that you should look out for, such as repetitive behaviours, delayed speech, predisposition to ordering or sequencing or repetitive behaviours, self-stimulatory movements such as hand flapping, sensory sensitivities to noise, smell, sound, some or all of those, difficulties in with non-verbal communications, reading non-verbal cues, for example, feelings, their own feelings, and understanding others' feelings, seeing things from the point of view of someone else, and struggling to cope within transitions. So the reason that I've repeated those is because I think those are things that we as early years practitioners should be looking out for, should be noting, should be discussing with our team, with parents, with our managers, when we see those kind of things, as they could be flags. Okay, we talked about in the course the importance of early identification. This is key, because the earlier you start to identify, potential special needs, the earlier you can get onto specialist help and find ways to support that child that could have lifelong impact on how they manage or handle their condition or limitation. So early support, early identification leads to early support and early intervention, which can be very significant in long-term impact of the child's special needs. So at Rainbow we use the snapshot form, which is a form that we use on a regular basis to just take a snapshot of all of the class to see who's purple, that we already know about, green, where we have no special needs concerns, amber, where we have some things that we think we need to monitor and see how they unravel or unpack, and red, those children in the class where we do feel that there is a special need. We talked about the importance of observations, to observe, keep records of everything that you notice, so that when you come to do a case review, when you come to link in with other professionals, you have an evidence base to draw from. The assessment, which is usually in line with other professionals. We as early years practitioners wouldn't undertake an assessment. We would gather evidence, we would do the observations, and then we would rely on more specially qualified practitioners, such as speech and language, such as neurologists, such as educational psychologists, who would do that formal assessment process and identify a specific impairment or condition that a child has. Communication within the team is key, so that there's a consistent approach to supporting a child with special needs, but also identifying and recording, that communication within the team is important to ensure that things are not missed and things are shared. It's also important to share the concerns with parents, and to do that in the right way, and to do that over time as well. So snippets of information as soon as you have it, sharing your observations, and then bringing together the observations that you've shared and talking about a bigger picture, and referring the parents really to a referral. The course also talked about some strategies and activity ideas that you can use. There was a great video from Ireland in the course that really focused on how you can use images and pictorial support to help children through their day, through transitions, through routines, etc. We also talked about the implications of language. I did a little video on that said how important and how language shapes thinking and concepts and realities. So it's really important that we choose and we select the right language that is empowering, and language that is clear and accurate and descriptive. And finally, the last session in the course is a resource bank. And we would ask you, if there are things that you think should be added to that part of the course, do let us know, and we will build that part of the course over time to include more useful resources that you can go to. So I hope you've enjoyed the course. I hope you found that it met the learning objectives that we set out to do. And I would remind you that this is just an introduction to special needs. You are not experts now. You may be a little more knowledgeable. You may be more familiar with key terminology. You may know more about processes that we need to follow, but you are not yet expert in special needs. But you should now be introduced to the ideas and concepts, okay? Good luck with working with children in your groups, and I hope that you are able to apply some of the knowledge that you have picked up and developed through the course to your practice.